My grandpa is 78 years old, retired military, and the kind of man who starts his mornings with black coffee, a quiet prayer, and casting a line into the same fishing hole he's used since the 1980s. His house sits on 10 acres of private land in a quiet stretch of North Carolina. At the edge of his property is a small lake, technically a man-made reservoir that spans across his land and a few neighboring parcels. What most people don't realize is that my grandpa legally owns a huge portion of the shoreline, including a stretch that borders a new HOA development built about a decade ago. You'd think a peaceful old man fishing by the water would be no one's business. Enter HOA Karen. Karen is the president of the Waterside Glen Lakeside HOA, which sounds fancy, but in reality is just a cluster of overpriced vinyl-sided homes stuffed around what they call exclusive lake access. The HOA built a private dock and small park area right at the edge of the water, and they love pretending they own the whole lake. They don't. One Tuesday morning, Pink Visor came power walking down the trail with a phone in her hand. My grandpa said she looked like she was trying out for Real Housewives. Base Fishing Edition. Excuse me, you can't fish here. This is private HOA property. My grandpa tipped his hat and said, "Morning, ma'am. I'm on my land." "No, you're trespassing. I'm calling the police." And she did. She called 911 and reported an armed trespasser on private HOA lake property. Within 3 minutes, a county sheriff's vehicle pulled up, lights flashing. Right as I arrived to drop off lunch for my grandpa. I watched the deputy get out, glance at my grandpa, then walk over to Karen. After about 30 seconds of animated squawking from her, the officer walked back over and asked my grandpa, "You got your ID, sir?" My grandpa handed it over, smiled, and said calmly, "Of course, you might want to also look at this." He handed the deputy a laminated survey map and deed that clearly marked his property lines, including the section of lakefront the HOA had been using as a public walkway for the past 10 years. The officer's eyebrows went up. Karen stomped over, demanding the deputy remove this squatter from her shoreline. That's when Grandpa delivered the haymaker. "Ma'am, not only am I not trespassing, but your HOA's dock, the benches, the kayak rack, that whole park, they're all on my land." Her jaw dropped. What Karen didn't know is that years ago, the HOA had negotiated a temporary easement with the prior owner, allowing residents to use a strip of land at the edge of the lake. But that easement expired 5 years ago and was never renewed. When Grandpa bought the land, he decided not to extend it. Mostly because he didn't like the HOA board's attitude, and partially because people kept leaving trash and broken paddle boats along the shore. We had an attorney send them 2 official notices, stating that their access to the shoreline was revoked and any further use would be considered trespassing. They ignored it. And now Karen had just called the cops on the legal owner. The deputy turned to Karen and said, "Ma'am, you might want to stop talking." Then he pulled out a little notepad and said, "Sir, would you like to press charges for harassment or trespassing?" My grandpa chuckled. "No, not today, but I'd like a report on file." Karen was still fuming as the officer gently escorted her back to the HOA lot, warning her to leave the man alone. She yelled something about calling her lawyer, and how this isn't over. Oh, but it was. Here's the fallout. Small Blue Diamond Grandpa sued the HOA, not Karen personally, but the HOA, for continued trespassing and unauthorized construction on his land. The benches, dock, and a portion of the walking trail were all on his property. Small Blue Diamond, the court ruled in his favor. The HOA was forced to remove the entire dock, tear up the trail, and pay $2 million in damages and legal fees. Insurance covered some, but not all. Small Blue Diamond residents were furious. Several of them didn't even know the HOA didn't own the shoreline. A bunch resigned from the board. Karen was pressured to step down and eventually moved out 6 months later. Small blue diamond and grandpa? He now has a fresh no trespassing private shoreline sign, a new trail cam setup, and a new dock, just for him and Duke.